If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, which is the most frightening creature of your folklore. In northern Canada there's a creature called the Wendigo. It used to be a person that once upon a time tainted his/her soul and ate human flesh. The Wendigo became so consumed with flesh after that it became insatiable. All attempts it makes at feeding itself grows the Wendigo and doesn't satiate it. They are said to have eaten their own lips because they just couldn't resist. As the legends go, you should be careful while walking the forests, as the Wendigo might capture you and eat you. But it won't just eat you in one go. It's used to hunger. It'll keep you alive as long as possible so that it has a food source for as long as it can during the winter. We have a creature called a curry. It is known to wait near graves of people who have died on the moor. If you walk past one of these graves, it will latch onto you. It slowly convinces you of its existence over the course of weeks, if not months. First you may hear a faint whisper in your ear. You may dream of it or feel a cool touch on the back of your neck. Over time its presence will start become more known. It will grab your leg in the night, start attacking you in your dreams, transpose its face onto your family members as you're talking to them. It will never make itself known to anyone else, making you question your own sanity. It will start talking to you, asking you to go back to the moorland, promising you your freedom back if you do. Eventually, once the mental torment gets too much, you give in and wander back out to the moors. It will keep telling you you're almost there, allowing you to wander aimlessly around. Eventually, exhaustion will strike you and you will be forced to watch your body succumb to the elements. As you lie there, unable to lift a finger, the curry tells you how much it will enjoy dragging your soul to hell. And like that, another grave is created. God, the Stick Indians. I live right by a reservation north of Seattle, and go onto the res daily. One time me and some friends were at a beach on the res kinda late at night. The beach was against a cliff about 30 feet tall, and there were two ways to get up the cliff. One was the road to the lower parking lot and the other was a winding trail with stairs, the original way to the beach. Friends and I had parked at the top of the cliff and decided to take the path back up. It leads you through the forested areas a bit and opens up into the clearing/upper parking lot. Out of my group, I was the only non-native, so I didn't know many of the stories. We were about halfway up the cliff when I heard some crying. On this trail there's a couple picnic tables, and in the dark I saw someone human-shaped sitting at a nearby one sobbing into their hands. I asked if they were okay and started walking towards them, but 3 of my friends grabbed me and held me back. The thing stood up and looked at us. And holy crap! It was about 7 feet tall, covered in matted fur and these black eyes. Or holes, I'm still not sure. I kept feeling like I should look into its eyes, but my friend forced my head down and we started running up the rest of the cliff. We didn't stop until we got into the car and it sped out of the parking lot. One friend claimed to have seen the creature in the trees as we drove away, but I was too scared to look. It's been close to 5 years now and I haven't been back to that beach since. You all need to hear about La Segua. It has a long history and I have heard of stories from all Central America, so I am going with it being a regional legend rather than a specific country. However, anybody from Costa Rica will be able to tell you the story. So the legend begins when people told stories of riding, on a horse, from one town to their own at night after maybe a few drinks. On the way they would see a young pretty girl, white light skin, big dark eyes, and long dark hair. As any gentleman would do, be it with bad intentions or not, they would stop and ask the girl if she needed help, and they would hop on the back of the horse, recently motorcycles and cars, and say they just needed a lift to the next town over, maybe a mile or 2 down the road. After a while of riding, you might starting thinking that maybe this girl should pay for her little trip somehow. This is when you notice your horse is speeding up to a gallop as if frightened by something, and you would start to feel warm moist air on the or side of your neck accompanied by a smell of rancid putrefaction. A drip of something warm and slimy would hit the back of your head and slowly slide down into your shirt. Perplexed you look back at your roadside damsel only to see her head has changed to that of a nightmare horse with the recognizable dark as death eyes, spewing saliva everywhere with its wide open mouth neighing to the night like only a nightmare would. If you are lucky and your intentions were purely good, you can loosen its now impossibly strong grip just enough to make it fall before its gaze turns you into a dead carcass forever staring back into the eyes of La Segua. Even the survivors are left damaged, as they tend to be left as scarred remains of their former selves, forever doubting if what they saw was real or not. Many left with the bite mark of La Segua usually on their cheek or neck, marking them forever. To this day I have never given a ride to any girls at night. Especially not ones with dark eyes and black hair. I grew up in Botswana and there the scariest thing I heard of was the Tokoloshi. I heard such different stories that were not quite in line with the Wikipedia entry, but from what I was told by the Swana people, it is a little brick-high demon with red eyes. If you saw him, legend has it he would either just play tricks on you like set fire to your clothes and tickle you, or he would decide to cause serious bodily harm like biting all your toes off while sleeping, slitting your wrists or killing your family around you, for no reason whatsoever. Some people really believed in him and wouldn't even talk about him in case he appeared. One time I remember my brother and I got laser pointers for Christmas, so on the back of the pickup, backy, one night we were shining them really far to see if anyone could see them. They did, and oh my god, I can never forget the screaming. People ran in all directions, pushing things over to get away as fast as possible, some even running deep into the bush where there was danger of becoming lion dinner. My brother and I looked at each other in horror, wondering what we had done. It was only months later when I realized it was probably because they thought the two red dots were the eyes of the Tokoloshi, coming for their toes. Domu Boys, basically Eastern European house elves. A few years ago my dad lost his keychain with his USB on it. It had tons of documents he was working on and it went missing for 3 days. He was crazy stressed about it and we legit turned the house upside down. So my mom, an educated, rational skeptic, as a last, albeit humorous, resort decided to try the ritual of calling out the Domu Boy, putting sunflower seeds in the corner of the kitchen, with a small glass of sugar water. You basically trade food for the return of your item. The next day, as my dad brought me home from school, he went upstairs and found the keychain lying right on top of the duvet of their made bed. Both he and my mom swear up and down that neither one placed them there, and I know for a fact that I didn't. I was like 16 when this happened, and this is something that's been brought up in the company of other adults and friends, so I know it's not just some parental whimsy like pretending to be Santa. To this day, I still don't know what to think and it's always slightly creeped me out. Well, in Germany we have the Nasher, which is basically a zombie, a vampire, and a banshee all rolled into one. German efficiency, you see. A Nasher is created most commonly after suicide, and sometimes from an accidental death. According to German lore, a person does not become a Nasher from being bitten or scratched. The transformation happens after death and is not communicable. Nashers are also related to sickness and disease. If a large group of people died of the plague, the first person to have died is believed to be a Nasher. Typically, a Nasher devours its family members upon waking. It has also been said that they devour their own bodies, including their funeral shrouds, and the more of themselves they eat, the more of their family they physically drain. It is not unlikely that the idea of the dead eating themselves might have risen from bodies in open graves who had been partly eaten by scavengers like rats. Some Kashubis believe that the Nasher would leave its grave, shapeshifting into the form of a pig, and pay a visit to their family members to feast on their blood. In addition, the Nasher was able to ascend to a church belfry to ring the bells, bringing death to anyone who hears them. Another lesser-known ability of the Nasher is the power it had to bring death by causing its shadow to fall upon someone. Those hunting the Nasher in the graveyard would listen for grunting sounds that it would make while it munched on its grave clothes. In Venezuela, the most frightening has to be El Silvan or the Whistler. There once was boy, who lived happily with his mother, father and grandfather in Los Llanos, a region in Venezuela. They lived a simple life of farming. However, his parents raised him to become very spoiled child. He would not eat certain foods and would cry out until his parents pleased him. One day, the boy asked his father to hunt deer for them to eat, as the deer was his favorite. The father decided to please his son and hunt a deer for him to eat. Sadly, after hours of searching, he failed to return with anything. Ever so hungry, upon seeing that his father had returned empty-handed, he took his father's hunting knife and killed him with it. At that moment, the mother and the grandfather rushed inside, only to find the boy standing over his father's corpse. As the mother cried for her husband, the grandfather took it upon himself to punish the boy. First, he tied the boy to a tree and with a whip, he struck his back repeatedly until he bled. Then he squeezed lemons on his back. And finally gave him a sack, filled with his father's remains, and cast him away into the plains to carry them as he sets the dogs after him. But before he unleashed the dogs, as the boy ran away, his grandfather cursed him. As the boy ran into the woods, his legs started to grow, and he started to whistle a very particular tune. As he got lost, forever hunted, forever cursed, left to wander the plains, bringing death to anyone whom he may happen to across. His whistling is tricky, for if you hear it close, it means he's far. But if you hear it far, it means he's very close to you. Unlike other legends of Venezuela, El Silvan does not pursue a specific kind of victim. He is regarded as an omen of death for anyone who wanders the plains at night. He follows his victims, first from afar, tricking them with his whistling until gradually catching up to them. He takes the form of a man of 5 or 6 meters of height. His abnormally long and skinny body is full of lashes and wounds from the punishment of his grandfather. He wears a straw hat to hide his face, which is said to be like the face of the devil, and carries a bag that resonates with the sound of bones, those of his father and every victim he's taken. So if you wander the Venezuelan llanos and you hear his whistle, be careful and remember this story, or you'll end up running directly into El Silvan and become a new pile of bones for his collection. Indigenous Woman here from Canada. Growing up I heard the tales of the little people. They are mischievous little people who live in the woods. They like to play games, but are harmless. One day, one of my mom's friends went missing. The whole reserve where we are from went looking for her. 6 hours roll by and it's getting dark. This was in the late 50s BTW. So, the little girl comes skipping out of the woods. Her parents are relieved and she didn't understand what the fuss was all about. She said she was only gone for 10 minutes and played with these children for a few minutes. They told her it was time to go back and they brought her back to her starting point. When she turned around they were gone. These were Caucasian children in the woods on a native reserve in the 50s. Would not ducking happen. Another story, my mom and her brothers were playing outside. You'd have to understand their house was in the middle of nowhere. They hear rustling in the bushes and the patter of little bare feet and laughter. My mom and her brothers run to the road to play with them. There's no one there. Then heard even higher laughter and running back into the bushes. I think these little people would be fairies in other cultures. But, I was always fascinated with them. There's a number of creepy ones in the United States due to such a merging of cultures. Two that are almost always said are the Jersey Devil and Mothman. Most often described as a flying, hooved bipedal creature, although this varies, the Jersey Devil has been around since 1735, born by Mother Leeds as her 13th child. She claimed it would be the devil, and upon being born it morphed into the Jersey Devil, emitted a high-pitched shriek, killed the midwife and disappeared up the chimney. Supposedly in 1740 a priest exorcised it for a century, the next sighting being in 1890. It still appears intermittently, supposedly, terrorizing the Pine Barrens region of New Jersey. The Mothman was first sighted on November 12, 1966 by 5 men digging a grave, claiming to have seen a man-like figure flying low over the trees. November 15, 2 young couples tell the police they saw a large flying man with 10-foot wings and glowing red eyes following their car. Biologists say that the sightings may be a sandhill crane, unrecognized because they aren't native to the area. Mothman, somehow, is linked to the collapse of the Silver Bridge and the deaths of 46 people. In Georgia, the state, not the country, there's a strange location near Winder, a small town, called the Notarock. It's known as the Volcano of Georgia and is a strange, couple-acre-sized area of land made up of bubbling, bluish, sludge. Things cannot grow well in that area, and I don't believe it's been explained exactly what the area actually is. The scary thing is what lives in the Notarock. I'll quote and leave the source for where I read about the WOG. Excerpt from Georgia Mysteries: the Creek Indians called this area Notarock, somewhat akin to hell. They considered the area to be a place of great evil. In fact, it was said that living near the area was a monster called the WOG. It is the WOG that I find most interesting. They said that this was an animal with long jet black hair, the size of a horse, front legs larger than its hind legs, and had a small white sliver of white hair at the tip of its tail that it fanned up and down. The other spooky feature about this legendary animal was that it had a long forked tongue. According to Alan Brown in Haunted Georgia, the settlers in the area many years ago used to report that they could see the long forked tongue sticking in through the chinks in their log cabins. The Creek Indians said that Tay-Wog was the devil, and that he lived in Notarock. The Wog was said to have only eaten carrion but would attack if threatened. Other stories told about this legend state that the Wog would roam the area looking for small animals, some being dogs and cats, to devour. Used to live in a small town. Like the everyone knows everyone and when they farts type of small. Back in my days where I actually walked, I know, crazy right? I used to take an old gravel road surrounded by forest that would eventually lead into open marsh with thick dense forest on the sides. It used to be filled with coyotes and coyote dens. Don't know how the cattle wasn't killed there because they walked freely there as well. I'll save the many times I had to outrun bulls for another story. Anyways, one day I decided to walk in there possibly around 4 to 5. I remembered I had to be real quick because I also needed to walk to the only store around and that closed at 6. I got in there anyways and reached the gates, which would be the start of the too spooky for me march/forest full of coyotes. When I got there I met one of my good buddies calling my name on the other side of the fence. I knew something was weird, one reason being that he never walked a day in his life and another being that the end of the road lead down into the next community, which would be at least a 7 to 9 hour walk, possibly even more, so there was no possible way that he would have beat me to there, which meant he must have been in there for a while now. I stopped to chat with him for a while until I checked my phone to realize it was getting real close to store closing hours. I told him I had to take off to make the store and asked if he was walking out with me. He said he wasn't leaving yet, but he wanted me to walk further into the gate with him. Keep in mind nightfall's coming and that's one place you really don't want to be at night. I told him no, called him crazy. He kept insisting, begging me to walk in further, nearly holding his hand out for me to walk with him. At this point I found it extremely strange and was getting pretty weirded out. It came to the point where I pretty much just had to cut him off from talking and rudely leave. I thought about it the whole way back as to why the duck he was in there, considering he never told me, and as to why he would want me to walk in further when it was nearly dark. I got to the end of the gravel road anyways and had 10 minutes to catch the store. I was glad that I parked my car at the end of the path. I got in and zoomed off to the store. Keep in mind that my community and one road from the store to the next community, where I walked, was in between. I got to the store, ran in to get my cigarettes, and that is when I turned pale and felt weak. There he was, again. How was it possible, I thought. I asked him how the duck he did that? He asked what, and I said beat me from the gates to the store? What he said made me nearly drop to my knees in shivers. He responded by telling me that he literally just woke up from a nap and had to get to the store before it closed. Even typing this now I have full-blown shivers and goosebumps. I never, ever ducking returned to that gate. Nope to the ducking nope. He still swears to this day that it wasn't him and that he was actually napping. The only reason he believes me was because of how pale I turned. He told me lol. Just the thoughts of whatever the duck that was I was talking to trying to lure me in deeper into the path before nightfall scares the ducking crap out of me. Fairies have been known to shape-shift and lure humans into the woods where they'll wake up not knowing how they got there and having only limited memory. I'm from Scotland, Leah Moore, or the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui. A large creature in a similar vein to the Yeti said to inhabit Ben Macdui, the second tallest mountain in Scotland. However, the first reported sighting was in 1925, so perhaps you might not count this one as folklore. What I find interesting is that apparently few claim to have actually seen the creature itself. Those who do claim that it's large and grey. Because the name totally didn't suggest as much, did it? Instead, it is more common for people to report a general sense of dread and panicked fear and maybe the sound of the creature following them. The United States has tons of horrifying legendary creatures like skinwalkers, which have probably been discussed already, but an interesting one who's native to my own region is the scape or swamp lizard man. Lee County, South Carolina is close to Columbia, the state capital, where I live part-time. Our region has a lot of swampy, forested areas with thick brush that could hide who knows what. Legend has it that a teen named Christopher Davis was driving home one night in 1988 through scape or swamp when he heard a strange noise coming up from behind him as he was changing a blown tire. He turned around to see a 7-foot-tall lizard-like creature with claws like knives and red glowing eyes running straight at him. As he tried to drive away, it slashed through the car's roof and held on as he tried to shake it off. He luckily escaped unharmed. Just a few weeks later in the town of Bishopville, police were called to the scene of a car that appeared to have been mauled by a wild animal. It was covered in teeth marks and muddy footprints, and strange clumps of reddish hair were also found. During the investigation, police discovered that locals had seen a bizarre creature with a brown or green body and glowing red eyes. In the month following these incidents, there were several more reports of strange lizard-like creature sightings and car maulings. One investigation produced several casts of three-toed footprints that experts said did not match that of any known animal. They had likely come from some sort of mutant. The reports attracted visitors who were eager to catch a sighting of the creature, and a local radio station offered a $1 million reward for its capture. However, sightings declined in the fall of that year, and the last reliable one was in 1990. Only time will be able to tell whether all of this was an elaborate conspiracy or whether the lizard man just retreated back into the swamp, waiting for the right time to return. So, in my hometown, a very small Springfield in eastern Canada, New Brunswick to be specific, there was a farmer named Robinson who had cows. When the English chased the French out, he was murdered. His head chopped off and his cattle killed. His land was down near the bridge out of town that goes through a deep dark woods, and I've heard several people say they've seen him there in the wee hours of the morning. A newborn calf impaled on a pitchfork slung over his shoulder and his head carried in his other hand, hair balled up in his fist, twisting as he crosses the road. Until it makes eye contact with you. The one guy who claims that happened went off the road and got some pretty serious brain damage in the accident. He said it came for him and his car passed right through it, but he couldn't get away. He freaks out big time when people ask him about it, so nobody does. Freaky ducking story though. I'm not a believer in ghosts, but this one gets my spine all crawly, and it's barely known outside my hometown. Other folks from there have claimed to see Farmer Robinson, and people say their parents and grandparents have seen him too. Can't really avoid those woods, but there's rarely any reason to go through there after midnight. There's another story in those woods about Satan's rock too. It's kinda weird and not so scary. Basically a rock that Satan would be seen sitting on, and if you got the gall to walk up to him and speak to him, he'd afflict you with homicidal rage. But, if you ignored him, you'd be fine. The afflicted would yammer on about seeing Satan on the rock, but not knowing who he was, and that they need to carry out his will. Either way, nobody knows where in the woods the rock is, but I've never seen him. Background info: I live in the County Cairno, UK. We've an economy once supported by tin mining, and you can't walk more than a mile without seeing a dilapidated engine house. Back in the day, Cornwall's mines were owned by the Bassett family. They've a shady-ass history, secret hatches out of their manor house and the surrounding woods, dirty dealings, etc., and a monument erected to remember them on Carn Brea, which can be seen by the whole of Redruth. Tucking Mill Hill backs onto the South Crofty tin mine. Evidence of its mining history dates back to the 1500s. It was, in more recent years, owned by the Bassetts. This is a subject of some debate among people who tell this story, because nobody can decide whether it's a ghost related to the Bassetts, because it's also supposed to have been seen in Teddy Woods, which is where the secret hatches are, or if it counts as a legendary creature. Basically, when the mine was still under Bassett rule, tin miners routinely shared stories of seeing, and then being chased down by, a horseman with no limbs, on a black stallion, tailed by hunting dogs. Which is interesting, because the Bassetts were avid hunters. They'd be chased off Crofty and up Tucking Mill Hill. Nilanak, Pontianok. I was in Indonesia, Cilegon, visiting relatives back in the 80s for a month. It was a beach house and it was surrounded by paddy field and empty land. It was said that knis were female vampires or female ghosts that died during pregnancy. They would dig their victim's stomach with their fingernails and devour their sex organs. Anyways, one night or early morning, wasn't sure, I heard serious sobbing outside the window. It was a double-story house. I awoke to the sobbing since I was a light sleeper and wondered what's wrong. Everyone else was sleeping. The sobbing didn't stop at all and it was continuous. I kinda got paranoid after 5 minutes usually. People would stop after a minute or so to catch their breath. But it didn't. I couldn't sleep one bit the whole night listening to that sobbing. I managed to fall back to sleep during dawn and the sobbing stopped. Told my aunt about it and she brushed it off saying I was dreaming. When I was back home, my mom was all over me asking me if I saw it. I asked her saw what. She said the kundi. My aunt told her I heard it. I was ill for a couple of days after finding out what it was. Caribbean folklore, specifically countries that were colonized by both English and French. Dominica here. Sukuyant, Sukuya. She is a woman/witch who sheds her skin at night and looks like a huge firefly/ball of light roaming the islands and sucking blood of people alone in their homes. She tends to resemble the typical sweet little old lady during the daytime and is always nice to people so that she can get information about you. There are quite a few other attributes that she has to do with her speed, strength and flying abilities, but she has a few hilarious weaknesses. If two Sukuyants are walking in opposite directions, they must pass right shoulder to right shoulder, never left to left, or else they will get stuck and will not be able to move until darkness falls and they shed their skin and fly away. This will allow everyone to know who the Sukuyant is and is their major downfall, as they hiding in plain sight is their major strength. The second main weakness of a Sukuyant is that they must count all grains of rice they come across, so people have taken to dumping huge bags of rice outside of their houses which the Sukuyant must count before dawn or else she will be exposed. To kill a Sukuyant, you must grind her skin with coarse sea salt so that she has no skin to return to during the daylight and thus perishes. The Sukuyant leaves her skin in a jar or bowl in her house, so once the Sukuyant is found out, all that remains is to wait for nightfall, and then break into her house, find her skin and then grind it. I am indigenous, and can share a couple lesser known stories. A brief one you may be able to use IRL. The bird Parasaurus canadensis is also known as the gray jay, Canada jay, whiskey jack, Wisakijik, Wisajichak. It is a trickster-like coyote. But it is a fair-minded trickster, who enjoys human company, and isn't as inclined to mess with a person who doesn't bring it on themselves. When you see it in a park or forest, take a small food item like a chunk of bread and hold it in your outstretched palm. Even a wild one of these trickster birds will often come land on your hand and take the treat. In return, the bird will put a smile on your face. A longer one, but also practical. We live in a crowded world, overlapping with other worlds stacked upon each other. Sometimes you will get a glimpse of the people and creatures of these other worlds. Children who have not been taught to distrust what they see will notice them, as do animals like your dog or cat. When you feel you aren't alone, or think you see movement in the corner of your eye, do not turn your head. The sides of your eyes cannot see colors, retinal rods versus cones, but can see a wider spectrum and in lower light. Instead of turning your head, look off to the side of what you sense, and you will be more likely to see who or what is there. Practice hones this skill, and soon, if you are lucky, you will be able to clearly see how crowded our world is. Later, if you are even luckier, you will be able to learn to unsee how crowded this world is. Black cats. The black cat of legends and fables that is a harbinger of bad luck is not a physical cat, Felis catus. It is a non-physical creature drawn by the energy of times of change, and only means bad luck if you are foolish when times are chaotic. The true black cat will be seen to be darting around nearby, and will look like a blurry black shape or shadow, moving quickly, low to the ground, and about twice the size of a house cat. The more chaotic the times, the closer they will get, and the more visible they will become. If they cross your path or you see more than one in a short time, choose your words and actions carefully, and subject potential decisions to extra scrutiny. There's a lot of ducked up crap in Irish mythology, mostly creatures that try and trick you in paying attention to them, only to trap and murder your ass. It's debatable which is the creepiest, but I would argue that it's fairies. Not fairies, which are cute beautiful cherub-like things that sing and dance and frolic in the meadows and sunshine. Mother ducking fairies. You do not duck with fairies. You do not get their attention, you do not insult them, you do not disrespect their hills and lands, and you do not let your guard down. Fairies are, at best, neutral to humans. Except when they're bored. Then they duck your crap up. They cause your crops to fail, cause illnesses, bring bad fortune, and if you don't keep an eye out, they'll steal your baby to eat it and replace it with a changeling that will get sick and die soon after. Fairies in Ireland are like believing in luck. You know it's bullshit, and that luckiness is just a coincidence that has to happen eventually, but you'll still cross your fingers or knock on wood to prevent it. Same deal with fairies. We all know it's bullshit, and that they're not real. But maybe just in case, we shouldn't bulldoze that fairy hill, we can build the motorway around it instead. Aswang, a mythical creature of the Philippines. A witch that can form into many animals such as snakes, wolves, bats, etc. She preys on pregnant women at night, eating their unborn child by slicing its razor-sharp tongue through the woman's belly into the womb, leaving its victim lifeless. She is no stranger to also eating small children. Aswang's screech is high-pitched, her presence known at night in the more rural areas of the Philippine Islands. My experience: I was visiting family in the city of Morong, where my grandmother lives out in the rice fields. One night, my cousins and I were outside. We heard a screeching noise that spooked us, but we thought nothing of it. My uncle rushed outside screaming, wielding his machete in his hand, calling us to hurry inside. As we sat inside the entrance with a window directly in front of me, I saw glowing eyes. I am not kidding, this is legit. My uncle quickly closed the window, still screaming, then he heads outside and emerges a few minutes later and tells us all to go to bed. Apparently, the witch doesn't like loud noises, much like her cry. Then when my uncle chopped the head off the black snake he found outside our door, her head got away somehow, another animal run off with it? Or was it her mysterious magic? And it left its body for us to find that morning. The Aswang was probably lured to our home as my little brother was with us, about 3 years old. Poor kid doesn't remember the night my uncle saved his life. True story. My husband does not want to go there because of this. There are movies that I watched when I came back home to the States that freaked me out even more. There's a local legend in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which involves a mysterious and supposedly deadly sort of otherworldly creature. Some versions claim that it's a man-like shapeshifter, capable of blending in with the shadows as it stalks through the desert. Others describe the beast as being curiously canine in nature, albeit with 2 long limbs, black claws, and eyes that seem to burn like pinprick embers in the darkness. One thing that remains the same through every retelling, though, is the high and eerie keening noise it's said to make when it hunts down its prey. One evening when I was about 11 years old, I heard it. I had been lying in bed, reading beneath my covers with a flashlight, when a mournful howl pierced the air from somewhere across the moonlit sands. My first thought was that it had been a coyote. But as the sound echoed through the night for a second time, I felt a shiver of panic flash up my spine and a deep weight of dread coalesce in my chest. That evil wail was not the call of anything I had ever encountered, nor of something that should have even existed in the waking world. It was the cry of a nightmare incarnate, and no amount of reason or rationality could shake me of that notion. Now, at around the same time as this story, I'd been doing my best to foster a reputation for being an independent and unflappable badass. That goal went swiftly out the window as the screeches seemed to draw ever closer, and I quickly ran from my room to seek the protection of my parents. Upon reaching their door, though, I was presented with an even more terrifying discovery. The howls were coming from inside the house, along with a lot of heavy breathing and the occasional whisper. I couldn't look my mother in the eye for a week. I've got one you probably all know, but many may not know the origins of the word nightmare. A nightmare is a horse that literally invades your dreams and causes said nightmares. The German word for it is Nachtmar, and that is likely how you English peeps got another loan word you wouldn't even think about twice in day-to-day life, but as someone whose job involves languages, this is highly fascinating. The Yara Maya, who is a legendary creature found in Australian Aboriginal mythology. According to legend, the creature resembles a little red man with a very big head, a large mouth with no teeth and suckers on the ends of its hands and feet. The Yara Maya, who is said to live in fig trees. Instead of hunting for food, it is described as waiting for an unsuspecting traveler to rest under the tree. The creature then drops down and uses its suckers to drain the victim's blood. After that, it consumes the person, drinks some water, and then takes a nap. When the Yara Maya who awakens, it regurgitates the victim, leaving it shorter than before. The victim's skin also has a reddish tint to it that it didn't have before. 1-2, it repeats this process several times. At length, the victim is transformed into a Yara Maya who itself. According to legend, the Yara Maya who is only active during the day and only targets living prey. Playing dead until sunset, it is said to only hunt during the day, is offered as a ploy to avoid attack. America. The Wendigo is a cannibal monster or evil spirit native to the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of both the United States and Canada/Manitoba. The Wendigo may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and made them become monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and the cultural taboos against such behaviors. The legend lends its name to the disputed modern medical term Wendigo psychosis, which is considered by psychiatrists to be a form of culture-bound syndrome with symptoms such as an intense craving for human flesh and a fear of becoming a cannibal. In some indigenous communities, environmental destruction and insatiable greed are also seen as a manifestation of Wendigo psychosis. In historical accounts of Wendigo psychosis, it has been reported that humans became possessed by the Wendigo spirit, leading them to crave human flesh and other obscene things. The most common response when a person showed signs of Wendigo psychosis was a curing attempt by traditional native healers. In the cases where these attempts failed, reports indicate that the possessed person began either to threaten those around them or to act violently or antisocially. Generally, they were then executed. Cases of this type of Wendigo psychosis, though evidently real, were relatively rare, and it was even rarer for them to culminate in execution. Theories about how to deal with contemporary cases vary. I'm not from Japan, but I have read about these things for years. Here are some of my personal favorites. Teke, a spirit of a person whose body was cut in half by an oncoming train. They have no legs and they drag their torso, which apparently makes a teke sound. They're pretty fast, and if they catch you, they'll slice your body in two and you'll become a teke as well. I also watched the movie based off the legend. Pretty decent. The teke looks disgusting, in a good way. Hachishaku-sama, the ghost of a woman who stands at 8 feet tall. Hachi means 8, shaku is an old unit of length. She targets children, and if she spots a child she likes, she'll make an unnerving po sound and kidnap them. Read the full story on Scary for Kids. It's a really good and intense read. Rakurokubi, female in appearance, but as the night approaches, their necks elongate, which allows their heads to move freely across a wide open space. Best part is there is an even worse alternative. The Nukubi, i.e. removable head woman. The Nukubi will detach her head from her body and her head will float and wander across Japan at night looking for victims to eat. The Nukubi will hide their bodies as they search, and if you find a body with no head attached to it, it's best to hide it in a different spot so the disembodied head can never find it. Then you also have the notable legends like the slit-mouthed woman, Kuchisake Onna, cow head, cursed poem Tamino's hell, etc. Japan is a wonderful place. In Yucatan, Mexico, there are these gnomish spirits the Mayan people call aluxes, pronounced like aluxes. They look like kid-sized adults but in a weird way. People do all kinds of rituals to be at peace with them because they're annoying as duck if you piss them off. Crops won't grow, things will go missing in your house, straight up they will be messing with you all the time. In rural areas especially, they believe 100% in them and openly talk about the rituals and the spooky stories about them. 10/10 wouldn't mess with an Alux. Also, there is a local legend about a gigantic black dog with red or yellow eyes, depending on the damn dog's mood apparently, that has been seen on the road to rural areas, and it seems like that angry demon dog is there to kill you or scare you enough to have an accident. Like it's the size of a small pony or something but stares right into your soul. Many people I know swear they've seen it and never drove faster in their lives. Yucatan Peninsula has some really interesting stories. Chupacabra, it might have been a kind of dog but very tall for a quadrupedal animal. My dad had a biography of this dude from the early 80s who conducted armed missions in Costa Rica privately. It was a kind of boring book with a lot of written pictures of the rainforest and the wildlife. Then some minor gunfights with the coke lords of the region. Then there's an odd chapter explaining a couple nights, where he slept out on the border to some farmer's field. Him and his partner basically dug a hole up on a hill near the trees and slept in it, hiding under leaves. He woke up in the middle of the night to gunfire and his partner was already behind him in the tree line watching the adjacent field below them. He slowly crawls into the trees to his partner to survey the situation. It was the owner of the land and his two sons, a couple 100 feet down a hill from them. They were chasing what looked like a horse at first, shooting rifles in the air while they chased it. After a while watching this animal, they noticed something odd about its physical appearance. The entire property had 3 to 4 foot high barbed fences around the perimeter. The animal ran up alongside it and its head was a clear 1 to 2 feet over the top of the fence. His fur was all messed up, had a small head and slender body like a greyhound. Then when farmers got close enough, it jumped and cleared the fence like a deer, ran along the other side of the fence like a dog and finally cut into the woods. My best friend and I grew up in a small town in the Cascade Mountains in southwest Washington. We were driving back to her house at like 1:30 a.m. and saw a big werewolf thing leisurely cross the road on 2 legs right in front of us. We both just sucked in air, stopped talking, and after a second or two we turned to each other and she asked, "Did you see that?" And I said yup, and we didn't talk about it again until we both in-depthly wrote down a description and then shared it with each other. We described the same thing. It was right next to where a Christmas tree farm was, right next to some thick woods. In those woods is a white plastic chair under a tree where a classmate had hung himself 4 years prior. That chair sat there growing moss and algae for several years. What we saw was a wolf's face, long arms and legs, a thick bushy tail and a slightly hunched back. It took huge strides and looked over at us when it was about halfway across the road. It was like a freaking werewolf. The Mimi. These were a shy, thin, tall humanoid spirit talked about in Australian Aboriginal folklore. The Mimi would habitually avoid humans, were expert climbers, could hide in narrow crevices, and were mostly nocturnal. Other than being a little more advanced and a little less stocky than the early humans on the continent, they are described as remarkably human-like in their appearance and behavior. Aside from the mythical rainbow serpent, which is a godlike creator being, the Mimi are one of the most prominent figures in Indigenous Australian folklore. What I find most interesting is that the folklore is prominently made up of gods and monsters, benevolent and powerful creator spirits, and malevolent destructive creatures, but the Mimi are about as close as you can find to peers with the early Indigenous Australians. They exchanged basic knowledge and skills like painting and hunting. They aren't described as godlike, or as destructive monsters, just a different type of intelligent resident. These characteristics are pretty much unique to the Mimi in the folklore. When you consider the vastness of the Australian continent, and the extremely long history of the Indigenous Australians, up to 100,000 years in Australia, the timeline crossing over with other subspecies of human like Denisovan and Neanderthal, and the historically wide variation in human body structure, for example, Homo habilis only grew to 4 feet tall, it's entirely plausible that a subspecies of extremely lean, diminutive humans cohabited with the early Indigenous Australians. Northern Australian conditions don't favor the fossilization of land mammals due to the dryness and absence of geological activity, so any evidence of their existence would likely not last 50,000 to 100,000 years. I was hiking in Goskenen in Switzerland when I was a kid along with my parents and several of my relatives. We stopped to eat something along the way and me and 2 of my cousins went exploring for a bit. We found several half-hidden holes the size of basketballs. The holes were completely dark, so we decided to start throwing crap inside to see how deep it was. We couldn't actually hear the noise of the stones falling down, but after throwing crap inside, we suddenly heard a voice from inside the hole clearly yell stuff in some weird language that we couldn't understand. My cousin starts trying to talk with the thing, it responded in guttural language. That's when we decided to GTFO. Everyone decided to get the duck out and we told our parents. They said that it was the Burgess, a mountain spirit that protects and lives under the mountains.